Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, a belated welcome to Here Now Beyond Cities of the Afrofuture. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for riding with us. Let's have a hand for the films, please. I'm very happy to be here with you. I would like to, first of all, I would like to say a huge thanks to the San Francisco Urban Film Festival. Please let's give them that. It is so important, and I say this as a futurist, and I say this as an Afrofuturist, it's so important to create space for these conversations, for these films, for this work, for this innovation. And I really, I'm very, very appreciative of San Fran Urban Film Festival for doing so. It was a pleasure and an honor to curate this program, both the films as well as these folks that we are about to hear from. I'd also like to thank USF and the Leo T. McCarthy Foundation, or Center, for supporting this program, because that's key. This is, it's art and commerce, and they go hand in hand. I would also like to give a huge thanks to the African American Arts and Culture Complex where we are for hosting us. Thank you so much. So I'd like to introduce our panel guests. We have Derek Brown, who is the Senior Director of the Leo T. McCarthy Center at USF. We have Neema Jordan, who is a journalist and documentary filmmaker. And we have Afatasi, the artist, who is a multi-hyphenate artist, as well as the director of the first film that you saw, Black Space. So welcome to them. And it also happens that all three of them are native San Franciscans. So there's that. All right. So I'm gonna start with the far reaches of. And what was your first introduction to it?
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I gotta say, your shoe game is off the hook. Love those games. Definitely. All the shoe game up here is on point. Right? Definitely. That's an excellent looking question. Thank you. That's a $1 million question. I think it's that question. You can answer that in many, many different ways. For me, when I think of that, a future for African Americans, a bright future. I think of a joyous future. I often think about the first time I realized that particular term was with the Black Panther movie. Checking that out, seeing a future society of African Americans filled with pride and love and culture, as well as technology. So that's what I think about.
All right, good answer. And I'm sure many people probably share that in terms of Black Panther being an introduction. So I'm gonna move to Naima, and I'm gonna ask you the same question. What does Afrofuturism mean to you, and what was your introduction to it?
It's always a hard question, right? Because I think that there is a level where I've always thought about Afrofuturism as like Black sci-fi movies, and I was like, all right, cool, like that's where we are, right? And then I started to get a better understanding, and I would say that I had a homegirl who wrote a book called Black Girls Are From the Future. There was like a space where I was like very much online, and there was a lot of conversation around like when I was on Tumblr and like different ideas that were coming to me, and I was sort of saying like, oh, this is an interesting way to think about things, right? And then someone was like, bruh, Octavia Butler, and I was like, oh, okay, like I'm understanding it, right, in terms of like what the language is. And I also want to really give a special shout out to Ashara Akindayu, who's here in the front, who really like put me on in terms of Black futurist aesthetic and ideas and rhetoric, and like what it means for us as Black folks to have Afrofuturism at our core when we're organizing, and like what is this space, how are we looking forward, right? And so when I think about my introduction, I was doing a little bit of research, and I saw that like the term was coined around like 93. But when I think about what it was in my family, it was P-Funk, right? Like Parliament and Funkadelic, like that's mothership. Like, okay, here we go. Like this is Afrofuturism. So I do think that there's a lot of levels of it, but I will say that I really, in the last documentary, when the person says that enslaved Black folks being able to think about freedom is Afrofuturism, that really resonated with me, right? Because then Afrofuturism becomes the way that how do we as Black folks think about a better, more equitable, more holistic, more thriving, fulfilling, joyful future. That was long, but that's what it is.
Absolutely, no, but you raise a very good point, which is it existed before the label did.
Yes.
For sure. So, Afatasi, please tell us, what does Afrofuturism mean to you, and what was your introduction?
Afrofuturism to me is whatever the creator wants it to be, like if they are of Afro descent. I think we all participate in it, like every day, even though in little ways we don't know it. Like getting up and showing up sometimes is an Afrofuturist act, like for us in a world that is anti-Black. And so I think my first introduction to Afrofuturism, I really thought about this, just thinking, and I remember being, we didn't have cable growing up, and I remember PBS was always on.
Right on.
And I remember this documentary of Leontine Price, and she was singing an opera, and she had this costume on, and I was just like, I had never seen anything like that, and so many things, there's so many things, it was in black and white, so I knew it had to be old. Right, and I was just like, she's singing a different language, and she's beautiful, it was just and then just different music acts, LaBelle, and their costuming, and Earth, Wind and Fire, and their album covers that my dad used to buy. I just remember the costuming and the big afros, and a lot of the costumes that I was really attracted to, and just loving everything about it.
That's amazing. And so Afatasi is a textile artist, and so you can see the power of that influence. And, in many ways it speaks to the power of media, which we're going to get to in a little bit, but whether media is entertainment or it's informational, whatever it is very powerful, and it definitely makes an imprint. And so that's really cool to hear that struck you. I actually met her, Leontine Price, in New York once, and I can tell you that she was very otherworldly. She was, the way that you just described seeing her on the screen, that's the way she was in person. I was just like, this being before me, oh my God, So, Derek, you're a native of San Francisco, and you also have a very personal connection to the space where we are right now. So I wonder if you could talk about that, and if you could also talk about how urban renewal and redevelopment has has changed this space? And further, I guess more specifically, why does the Western Addition look the way it looks right now?
Absolutely. Great question as well. And speaking about place and just thinking about place, it's funny. I'm not going to give my age, but exactly where we are right now, I grew up, born and raised right here in the Western Addition. I grew up right across the street in Banneker Homes. And we are sitting right where I learned how to drive. So I'm just thinking about, going around little circles in the parking lot, learning how to drive. So just thought about that. But for me, growing up in the Western Addition, I kind of feel like it was like a Jolly Rancher. It was hard, but sweet. This was a place where my family lived. My family came out here from the South, in the late 40s and 50s. Came out here and established themselves here in the Western Addition. My family was born here. My mother, my dad, etc., were born here. Unfortunately, due to like we talked about, Negro removal, urban renewal, things of that nature, most of my family does not even live out here in the city, let alone the Western Addition to date. But for us, growing up, it was tough. There was a lot of shooting in the area, drug activity, etc. And we had to kind of fend through it. And for myself, I was fortunate enough to get through it, but a lot of my friends weren't that lucky. And a lot of the young people, or the students, or the young people that I grew up with, are not even living anymore. They ended up dead, in jail, or wandering the streets aimlessly. But for me, when I think about the Western Addition, again, it's tough, but it's sweet. It's home for me, and it's the place that I will continue to love. So that's what I think about when I think of the Western Addition and where I grew up.
Nice. Thank you very much. And it must be really trippy, though, to be in the space where you learn how to drive.
It's crazy. It's crazy, but it's a blessing as well, just being around the city and all the places that I grew up with, African American Cultural Complex, and,
right on.
Learning how to, drama classes, art classes, capoeira, things of that nature. But it's definitely a trip to see things, because things look a little different as well. And I know one more point, let me know
Sure.
if I'm talking too long.
No.
I'm not love to talk. But it's interesting because folks that, haven't lived here before, are new to out here, it's interesting. It's this one place in the Visadero, Nopa, which is this upscale restaurant. And I grew up here, born and raised, and I was just there not that long ago. And I was there looking around, and I was saying to myself, when I was a kid, this was just a wash house. This was just a wash house in the neighborhood. And now look at it now, and look at the streets. It's thriving and things of that nature. But I don't want to ramble on and on, but I just thought about that instance and that example.
No, but you're also raising this other really intriguing point, because I'm a sci-fi filmmaker, and so this idea of time and past, present, future. Personally, I think that time is a construct, and when I'm hearing you, I'm thinking about you being in the present, in the past, and in the future at the same time.
Yeah.
And thinking about Derek the kid who was, passing by the wash house or learning how to drive, just, how could you have imagined being here right now, talking about this?
You're right, definitely. And I think that, kudos to, I know Pamela Ball's organista is here as well, Senior Vice Provost at USF. And,
yes.
It took folks like her to recognize my potential and see something in me and nurture my talents throughout. And I'm successful because of individuals like her. So huge shout out to Pamela.
Right on. Naima, you come from both Oakland and San Francisco, so you are somewhat of a hybrid, speaking of sci-fi. And it's fair to say that the state of Black communities in both cities has changed quite a bit in your lifetime. Can you talk about those changes and how they've affected you and your loved ones?
So it was so funny when you said San Francisco native. I was like, I don't know if that's gonna fly, really. I was born here. We left when I was like 4. My people will call you out, like, nah, she from Oakland. But it is this interesting thing. I got off the bus and started walking towards the McDonald's. And I was like, that's not the direction I'm supposed to go in. I know I'm supposed to go the other way. And I called my mom and I said, Mama, what's the McDonald's that Daddy used to go to on Sundays and read the newspaper with his boys? And she was like, Fillmore and Golden Gate. And I was like, bet. Took a picture and sent it to her. She was like, ooh, right? And that's really the story of like my family and being out here. I was saying on a call the other day that when I went to the Independent, I was walking and my mom's godmother used to live on Fell, and I hit the front of her building and just like broke down crying, right? There is this space where I'm like constantly engaging with memory every time I'm here in San Francisco, and constantly thinking about like what this city used to be. And then also thinking about how we talk about the city, right? Because there's this way that as things shift, as Black folks get moved out, as lower income folks get moved out, as all of this stuff is happening, we start to act like Black folks never existed, right? Or like the city didn't used to be hella Black, or like it wasn't the Harlem of the West, or like all of these things didn't happen, right? And people associate San Francisco with white tech folks, and it's like, but that's not the city, right? And so then like, how do we have that conversation? It's just like when I say I live in Oakland, and people are like, oh, gentrification. I'm like, and you ain't never been east of the lake, so we need to have a conversation, right? And so when I think about what's happening, my mom always, when I was living in New York, and I told my mom, I was like, I feel like I need to get back to Oakland. And she said, yeah, you probably should, because pretty soon you're going to feel in Oakland the way I feel in San Francisco. None of the buildings that she grew up in exist anymore, right? And that is something very real to grapple with. So when you talk about that past and that present and that future, it's like constantly being in a space where I don't want every sort of action and movement to be a struggle against, right? Like I don't want to feel like I'm always fighting, but in a lot of ways I am, right? This is another Ashara shout out, because when I was working with her was the first time I was learning about the terms like placekeeping and placemaking, right? And so thinking about like how our existence, like us being in this space, you know, the folks running the center still being open, all of these things are placemaking and placekeeping, and then it's like, how do we keep that going? So then you know that we exist, like that idea of like there are black people in the future. How wild is that it's on museum walls and everyone's like, huh? I'm like, really, y'all? Like, it's that profound that there are black people in the future, because you don't expect us to be here, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, so one quick question. The conversation you had with your mom when she said, yeah, you better come back because you're going to start to feel the way I do in San Fran, that was before the pandemic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then that's a whole other...
It's a whole thing. I moved back home in 2013. Stuff was shifting very, very rapidly. And I was in Brooklyn like, ooh, there's a lot happening in Brooklyn. And every time I go back home to Oakland look different. Okay, like there's something that needs to happen there. So yeah, 2013 is when I came back.
That's wild, because then the pandemic brings its own dimension of disruption,
yes,
you know, and disappearances. Yes. And to your point about there are black people in the future, you know, there's a film called Logan's Run, which is a sci-fi, quote unquote, classic, which was made in I believe the late 70s. And it's set in future Los Angeles. And when I tell you, and there are many shots that are very wide shots in a public place with many, many, many people, there is not one person of color. I mean, not only not any black people, there are no Latinx people, there are no Asian people, there are no indigenous people. And so when we talk about, when you mentioned that being a revolutionary idea, which seems, it's like a no-brainer, of course we're gonna be here. But for many people, I think there is, for various reasons, there's a sort of assumption that that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, definitely. And when you see if you look up the drawings of like, when they talk about planning for a city, right? Or for a new development. Like, look at the drawings, look at those renderings. And people have started to push back on the renderings and say like, hey, I don't see no black folks in that rendering of downtown Oakland. What do you think you're building, right? But you know, and like maybe they'll switch it or maybe they won't, but like we're not even in the renderings.
Right, and so it becomes that much more important to make space, to create space across all dimensions of time. Afatasi, you are a native of San Francisco. You're also an artist who creates this future forward media, which is future forward art, which is multimedia. It's also multicultural because you are Afro-Polynesian. And it's also very innovative, which in many, many ways, really personifies what San Francisco is. This place of tremendous innovation, and that's sort of what drives it and makes it a powerhouse. But that innovation in the city has come at a really steep cost for Black people and Black communities. So I wish that you could tell us about, one, the community that you grew up in and how it's changed since you were a kid, and how those changes have affected you and your loved ones.
Sure. So I grew up in Lakeview, which is over by San Francisco State. So I think about just kind of like my dad. He came from the South. I had a very older parent, a survivor of Jim Crow as a father, and so he left the South and literally never went back. Like you think about your hometowns, right? Like we're all, like I really hella love being from San Francisco. Like that's like my thing. Like, you know, everybody has a thing, that's mine, right? And so like, my dad came here, like fleeing the like mob violence, right? If I should ever not live in San Francisco, I will be bringing my children back to San Francisco to be like, yeah, that's where, I don't know, San Francisco kids, like, that's where I got my first fight. That's how we are. Like, I'm sorry, but it's true. Like, that's, the spaces that hold memory for you. My dad never did that. And unfortunately, he passed when I was a child. And so, I wonder about a lot of things. Like I'm left to wonder about a lot of the things that happened to him because that's not how I live my life now, right? And then also just being from San Francisco during the war on drugs and how really horrific that was. It really was. Watching your classmates be arrested by police standing right outside the school. This is here, And like you see the same things. It's like I have that quote in there, like San Francisco, it throws rocks and hides its hand. It is segregated. Mm-hmm. It's a segregated city. And we sit here and act like we're such a metropolitan. Like, I hate when people do that. Like, in the audience, like, when you leave here, don't do that. And you have my permission as a native to, like, stop lying, like, and stop, like, you have, like, we'd rather not, I'm a member of this only shrinking demographic in the city. And I don't want to leave. I want to die and get buried in coma like the rest of everybody, like the rest of us, that's where our families are buried, right? And so my dad left the South, never spoke about it, never, just some horrific stories. And my mom, she's from Western Samoa, right? Born and raised. And she dealt with recent colonization. And so these are the paths that keep me rooted here, right? So I'm grateful to my parents for wanting to start because both of them started new lives in different ways.
Right.
Right.
Like my mother married the first black man she ever met, like seen in her life. Like ever seen in her life. And the missionaries, when she was in school, told her that black people were evil. And these are Christian people, right? Think about that. But so I'm sorry if I'm going on and on, but this is just kind of like the multiculturalism in my family, like just automatically makes me a futurist. Just because like being here and seeing the reality that I am in and seeing the parallels and seeing fractals of what my parents went through still happening.
Right.
So what's still happening to my grandmother still happening. And I really just, seeing us in the future is like I said, just an everyday act. Like just
gotta do it.
Yeah, you just
Gotta
like getting
do
up.
it. Thank you for sharing that, though.
Sorry, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So, Derek, you now head the McCarthy Center at USF, which prepares students for careers in public service. So, when it comes to the future of Black communities in San Francisco, how can the ideas within Afrofuturism shape the work that those students will do?
It's a great question. For me, I always believe it, seeing is believing. You can say one thing, but you really have to show the young people something. Case in point, one of the things, give it up. That was nice. I like, okay, Ron, thank you. For example, like even just myself, case in point, as I touched on before, growing up here in the Western Addition, right here where we are now, going to, George Washington High, hopping on the 31, Balboa, the 5, 38, etc. But I would go up and down the street, the same street that USF is on, and had no idea what was up there. I just thought it was some church on the hill. I had no idea we had a world-class university right here in San Francisco. But years later now that I'm here, at USF, leading the Leo T. McCarthy Center, shout out to Brian and Karen, they're over here, representing, definitely. Star was here a little earlier. But now that I'm in a position to open up the gates and open up the doors to USF, we're launching a program called Rising Dons Mentorship Program, where we're intentionally working with students of color, throughout San Francisco, community-based organizations, and inviting them to USF so they can actually see a campus, connect with some of our students that are right here now. Shout out to USF students, holding it down. You know it. Especially a lot of our Black and brown students, connecting them with students that look like them, that are here at USF, thriving, and really just trying to teach them and show them how we can all lead by example. So for myself, that's what I believe in. Seeing is believing. You have to work with our young people. You have to bring them under the tent like we are now, and really get them exposed to that futuristic life and preparing them for success like we do at the Leo T. McCarthy Center.
Right on, beautiful. So it's like planting the seeds, yes. Literally. So we are going to need to wrap up, and so I'm going to do a little speed round with everybody. You have about 20 seconds, and so I'll start on the other end. I'll start with Afatasi. The question is, what would you do if there was a mass arrival of extraterrestrials? And the second part of this, remember it's a speed round, is to just let people know where they can find you online.
Okay, I'm on Instagram at Afatasi the artist. And if there were some aliens that came, I would be so terrified, I'd be honest.
What would you do?
I would probably try to act like I had put on a costume, act like I had some authority, like I don't know, I would be terrified.
Okay, terror. All right, Naima, you're up.
Such a hard question. I would gather up my squad and try to get a compound together and pray that they had never seen TV before, because Like literally whatever, if they get in the media images that everybody else is getting, they coming after us. So I'm good.
And where can people find
I'm
you?
at Naima Jordan on all of the things, except for TikTok, because I don't use it.
Right on. Very good. Derek?
That's a great question. For me, I like to adapt. So I'm gonna, see where I can get in, where I fit in, and can kind of take things to the next level within the group and get my squad together with their squad and just continue to elevate. So that's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna make it happen together. Definitely.
All right, and where can people find you?
You can find me on, LinkedIn and all that, Derek Brown, or IG, Derek Brown 2828, and always come see me at USF.
And it's Derek with one R.
Oh, with one R, DERICK.
Right. So, well, to answer the question about the extraterrestrials, if there was a mass arrival, I think I'd be prone to try to communicate as well. I would be fascinated. I'd be scared, but I'd be really interested. So I'd try to work something out. So, okay. I'll be a representative. And you can find me at Celia C. Peters on socials, and my website is artisticfreedomltd.com. So I want to again thank each and every one of you for being here with us this evening. I want to thank you on behalf of the filmmakers. We had 4 women directors, 3 countries represented, 2 different American cities represented. I want to say a huge thanks to SF Urban Film Festival for making this space. I want to thank the African American Arts and Culture Complex for providing this space, the McCarthy Center for supporting us in this program. And I want to, again, say to everyone, have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you for coming.
Hey, say thank you. Come on, stand up here with me. Stand up here with me. What's your name?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Whittia Bettine. I live right at Lauren Miller Homes, and it's a some Black excellence on the stage because I'm a young person. I'm only 23 years old. And it's like, it's hard to imagine what it's like and all the solutions that can happen. But to see that people is doing it, like what you're saying, like seeing is believing. And it's great to see y'all. And also shout out to Faye. I found out she was Indonesian. I'm half Indonesian and Black. So it's amazing to see an Indo folk in the building.
Indo in the house. All right. That's Afrofuturism right there. Right? Thank you so much, everybody. Please fill out your surveys, and I want to thank the volunteers, especially Rihanna Tong, Austin Blackwell, Omar Mazri, Chris Cummings, Judy Grayboys, Muping Chang, Mindy Spat, Anna Budnick, and also the panelists and the moderator, Austin Blackwell over there, Skip and Michael on the tech today. Working it out, and follow us on SF Urban Film Fest on all the socials. And next up, tomorrow night, we are in person again in Soma at the 9th Street Independent Film Center. The event is called Through the Lens, Realizing Identity and Needs Through Filmmaking, and that's curated by Omid Manicherry, who's been doing live stream for us tonight. Thank you to the SF Urban Film Fest team, Ron Sundstrom, Omid Manicherry, Christelle Chelik, Robin Abad, Susie Smith, and I'm Faye Darmawi, and I'm out.